Hello everybody, Jake your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, it's Monday. On Mondays, we do tier lists. And on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
Hi, this is Karen Smith. It's 68 degrees, and there's a 30% chance that it's already raining.
Today's tier list is our Mewtwo tier list. I'm very excited about this one. There's a lot to talk about. This is for Mewtwo X, not Mewtwo Y, because Mewtwo Y is not out yet. So Mewtwo X is what we're going to be talking about today. The most recent release after the Mewtwo nerfs, the emergency nerfs that happened. Obviously, I'm not making a tier list within a very, very short window where Mewtwo was out before the emergency nerfs. Let's take a look at our tiers right here. We have our God tier. We only put one Pokemon in our God tier in our tier list. We're not freaking Norse around here. We have our S tier. These are Pokemon that I think are superb, amazing, other words that could be S, and I put an A word in there. The idea is something in the S tier is so incredibly good that it makes other Pokemon that fill a similar role look bad in comparison. We have our A plus tier. These are Pokemon that are extremely good. I think higher value than most of the pack. We have our A tier. A tier are solid choice Pokemon. They're a little better than the next tier, the B tier. I don't know what to say anymore about it. Still got the B tier, so that's insane. We have our C tier. These Pokemon are underperforming in my opinion. Basically, when I look at something in the C tier or even moving forward to the Decidueye Memorial tier, these are Pokemon who in their role feel like they're just supremely outclassed for a number of reasons, or the meta right now is just really rough for these Pokemon. So there'll be only a few Pokemon in our C and D tier. In fact, I think the longer and longer the game has gone on, the more and more Pokemon start to sort of fill in towards the middle, but we have some extreme outliers at the top, and this week is no exception. I may be a little more brief than normal. My voice is kind of rough right now. I have a little bit of a cold because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and that means I am constantly sick because she is constantly bringing home something. Let's take a look at our list. Where do we want to start right here? Let's start with what was right before Mewtwo. What was the release right before Mewtwo? Inteleon, right? Inteleon was our release right before Mewtwo. Let's start with some of our attackers right here. Inteleon is extremely good. I think Inteleon is either A plus or S tier. It might be S tier, honestly, and I think the big reason that this Pokemon sits up in these two rows is because of its water gun secure early, and then as the match goes on, its damage output is really incredible. Liquidation is sort of a sure hit almost. It actually, you know, it can get blocked by enemy Pokemon, but it's just a huge amount of damage spraying out from this Pokemon. Or you could use Snipe Shot, which I think has more use competitively than, you know, Liquidation might be used solo, if that sort of makes sense. So Snipe Shot, probably better for a competitive setting, although Liquidation still might be the call. And then Liquidation is mostly a solo queue move, I feel like. Snipe Shot is just a little too tough when you don't know if your team is going to be blocking for you, or if the enemies are going to be set up in a position where you're actually going to be able to get some hits. I think Inteleon is pretty incredible. It might even be an S tier Pokemon, but I kind of want to, like, I don't want to put too much bias on it. I love this Pokemon, and I think I might be overvaluing it just a smidge. That being said, that's why I'm putting it A plus instead of S. However, my heart is telling me that Inteleon is an S tier Pokemon. For our next attacker, let's talk about some of our auto attacker type Pokemon. So this tier list is going to be giving you an idea of what 99% of the players are going to be dealing with in Pokemon Unite. This isn't a top competitive level tier list. Although I think those tier lists are very cool, there are really only a certain amount of players that can really get a ton of value out of it. This is what you're going to be seeing in most games. That's why I'm going to take a Pokemon like Cinderace, and I'm going to say it is an A tier choice. In top level competitive play, you're really not seeing much Cinderace, if any at all. However, in most games, Cinder is a very solid attack damage carry Pokemon, or ADC. It does a lot of damage. It can maneuver around the battlefield pretty well. It has very strong secure. It has very strong rip. Cinderace is in a really solid place, especially with some buffs it received a little while back. It's not amazing or anything, but I do think Cinderace is very solid. And now that I'm just seeing these two Pokemon next to each other, I have to move Inteleon up. Inteleon is just so much better in my opinion. It's a little ways away from our buddy Cinderace here. In fact, if there was an A- tier or a B+ tier, maybe Cinderace would be in that tier. Alas, we don't have it. Next Pokemon, let's talk about Greninja. I think Cinderace outclasses Greninja a little bit here. While Greninja is still pretty good, it's a strong carry Pokemon, especially in the right hands. I don't particularly love it in this meta, especially needing to get a little close to things sometimes with Surf. There are times where that feels very valuable, but I don't really want to be close to a Mewtwo at all, and I think Greninja doesn't either. Water Shuriken doesn't really feel like it's that great into some of the bulkier Pokemon inside the game. While you can do very well with Greninja because it's a strong carry, I just don't feel like it's particularly poised to crush it right now inside the meta. And you kind of need central area for it, and there are a lot of Pokemon vying for the central area. It's just not in the best spot for a Greninja right now. Decidueye, however, I do think does a little better than Greninja, maybe even a little better than Cinderace. Here's the thing about Decidueye. At one point, Decidueye was terrible. That is why we have the Decidueye Memorial tier. Now, however, Decidueye is actually pretty good. It's just extremely punishable. So this Pokemon can do an insane amount of damage at insane range, and there are some situations where that is amazing. You don't want to be next to a lot of these meta Pokemon inside the game right now, and this is a Pokemon that can at least get away from them, and then from long range with Spirit Shackle, volley in insane amounts of damage. I think that has a lot of value inside the game right now. But whenever you see a Decidueye in the enemy team, you just know it's good eating for your carry Pokemon, your speedsters, and even a lot of your, all-rounders, things that can dive in and really clean it up. Decidueye is in a lot of trouble against those Pokemon. So you need to play at extreme range, but if you do, I think you can get a lot of value out of Decidueye. And Decidueye can also be played in lane, or path as the game calls it, and I think that's a huge advantage because Cinderace and Greninja, they don't really play in path that well. The next Pokemon I want to talk about is Dragapult. For a long time, I would say Dragapult is a little bit above the rest of these Pokemon, but right now there's just something that's going on. I feel like Dragapult, when I've had it on a lot of teams, it's not bad, and there are some great situations for it, but it actually just feels like it's tickling a lot of these opponents rather than picking up big KOs. Things like Goodra, Lapras, Umbreon, it just feels like they are eating too much damage from this thing while not going down. For that reason, I don't want to put it up into our A+ tier, even though before I have made a distinction between Dragapult and some of these other, attack damage carries. I actually think it's just kind of right in line with them. And now we have our weirdest attack damage carry that I don't even know exactly where to put. It's gonna have to go into our Nether Realm. That's right, for the first time ever, we have the Nether Realm. A realm that I don't even really understand what's going on with it. It's neither here nor there. It's really Nether Realm. And what the Nether Realm is the fact that I don't know where to put Duraludon right now, because when I play Duraludon, it actually doesn't seem that different than before. If I had to set it anywhere, I might even set it up into this A tier, but this Pokemon got a lot of weird changes, and I have to be honest, I have not really mapped out exactly what is going on with Dura, and I feel like it's a little bit of a disservice to you to say that I think Duraludon is still A+, or I think Duraludon's gotten knocked all the way down to the C tier. The few times I've played it, it still felt like a very, very strong Pokemon. I almost wonder if the big change that they made to this, just sort of moving it away from being more wild Pokemon focused and a little more enemy Pokemon focused, has kind of balanced it out. I would love to hear from you in the comments where you think Duraludon should fall on this tier list. If I had to put it anywhere, I'd probably put it right up here into the A tier. It still felt very solid, but its objective secure has definitely lessened. And because its objective secure has lessened, because the damage you do to wild Pokemon has been decreased, it has definitely changed its role considerably. I would love to hear from you in the comments. For now, Duraludon is going to sit in our Nether Realm. Moving on to our next attacker. Alolan Ninetales is still crushing it inside the game right now. Blizzard Avalanche is an amazing combination for this Pokemon, and while there are a lot of a very exciting Pokemon in the game right now. I think it's easy to forget Alolan Ninetales in a weird way. This Pokemon is still so incredibly brutal. The combo of Blizzard Avalanche is so amazingly strong. Its Unite move upgrade is really, really nice. Alolan Ninetales is still doing great inside of Pokemon Unite, and it actually plays pretty well into Mewtwo. You're going to be seeing a lot of Mewtwo. It's the new exciting legendary Pokemon. I think Blizzard Avalanche is nice because you can actually shut down Mewtwo for a moment, especially if it is not Mega'd yet. If you can get Mewtwo before it's Mega'd and catch it, you know, in one of those combos, you can snap it up and get a big KO. Alolan Ninetales doing great. Evolves at 4, plays great in lane, a really solid Pokemon right now. Speaking of another solid Pokemon, we're kind of going through our mages right here. I would say Espeon is still extremely solid. What you'll notice I'm doing with this tier list is almost ranking Pokemon that are alike somewhat together as best I can, because obviously you could say, well, Greninja is better than so-and-so, or Espeon, it's not better than Greninja, Jake. Greninja can KO an Espeon. But what I'm trying to do, by the way, that's a very patronizing voice. I'm basically saying that person's stupid, but that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is just explain to you that I'm trying to compare apples to apples. So I'm comparing Espeon a little bit to Alolan Ninetales right here. I think they're both very, very good. I think Alolan Ninetales outshines it a little bit, has a little stronger burst damage right now, but Espeon is still doing very well. Great secure, or if you're playing Psyshock, just a ton of damage. A really, really solid pick in the meta right now. Glaceon, I would say, is probably closer to A+ for me. Even though the Icicle Spear build is kind of weak right now. Kind of weak's not even right. Even though it's not broken. There was a meta, by the way, if you're just joining us on the world of Pokemon Unite, there was a meta where this was just incredibly busted. It was just some weird bug on top of some very unnecessary buffs. That's gone, the bug is gone, and now this Pokemon actually is somewhat more reasonable. I think Icy Wind is probably the stronger build for this Pokemon right now, but there's no question that being able to do that much damage essentially is a sure hit with either move at extreme range is very powerful in the game. I think Glaceon's still doing very, very well inside of Pokemon Unite. Another Pokemon that I think is doing solid is Delphox. I will say, I think the Fire Spin build for Delphox is not doing very well inside of this meta. However, Mystical Fire Flame Charge will at least let you rain in some damage to some of these, you know, bulkier Pokemon that you are dealing with inside the game. I could see an argument that Delphox has fallen off a little bit and maybe it's a rung lower, but it doesn't really feel like a B tier choice to me, and a lot of the special attackers don't because of the item Slick Spoon. Slick Spoon is incredible, and it's one of the only good ways to deal with a lot of these really tanky Pokemon on the enemy team. Let's talk about Mew next. Before we talk about Mewtwo, we've got to talk about Mew because it goes Mew then Mewtwo. So Mew, I think, is still really incredible, especially in a competitive atmosphere. The thing about this Pokemon is it's so unique to me. It's almost always an S tier choice. However, its power level doesn't feel like it fully sits up into our S tier. It is uniquely slippery. It is unique in the amount of damage it does. It is unique in the way that it plays. It's boosted, and a high level Mew player is an absolute force to be reckoned with right here. I think because of how unique it is and just how difficult it is to lock down, it sits up in our A+ tier. It doesn't feel as broken to be an S tier choice for me. Perhaps competitively though, it would sit up in our S tier. Gardevoir, I think Gardevoir is doing pretty solid right now. Good, solid mage, strong damage at range. And you know, a lot of times you'll see teams that are sort of death balling more and more. They're just like set up for this really, really tanky comp where they're kind of all running at you. You've got your Laprases and your Umbreons with a Clefable right there. Gardevoir is really great into a setup like that because you can use your Unite move and you can absolutely wreck multiple members of the enemy team. It's a little tough because it doesn't have as many escape options as some Pokemon do, but it's got great artillery damage from range. Speaking of artillery damage from range, I got to talk about Solar Beam Venusaur. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a huge Solar Beam Venusaur fan, and there are some people out there that are Petal Dance Giga Drain fans, and they're crazy. I've always been a Solar Beam Venusaur fan, but no. In reality, Solar Beam Venusaur has gained so much traction lately, especially in North America, especially in the competitive scene. But I think a lot of people are seeing that for Venusaur with a Slick Spoon, this is actually an amazing setup to deal with a lot of the tankiness that's inside the game right now. I was playing it earlier into Mewtwo. I actually had pretty solid matchups with both Solar Beam and Petal Dance Giga Drain into Mewtwo. The fact of the matter is Venusaur is still doing pretty well inside the game. Its Unite move is a real game changer, and I think that's probably the biggest reason I want to put it up into our A+ tier right now. I have not been putting Venu as high lately, but I actually think it's just doing really, really solid. You put an energy amp on it, you land these massive Unite moves, and you kind of decimate the enemy team. On top of that, it has two very solid playstyles, so I think Venusaur sits up here in the A+ tier for me. Cramorant's a weird one. Cram is so weird. I still think Cram is very good. It's rarely played, and I don't know how good it would be into Mewtwo. The amazing thing about Cram is with Dive Air Slash, you can really dance around the battlefield and do some impressive stuff, but Mewtwo kind of shuts it down with either build, which is a little scary. To be fair, Mewtwo shuts a lot of things down with either build, but I think Cramorant's in an okay spot still inside the game. It's very strong. It's just rarely played. I'm not seeing a lot of players pick it up, but I do think you could get a lot done with Cramorant. And the nice thing about this Pokemon is it feels like it's good at every point in the match with the Unite move that is still pretty solid. Pikachu is probably the only attacker that I'm a little underwhelmed on. I could say B tier maybe for Pikachu. I don't think it's bad. It's just more of a support Pokemon. And the other Pokemon all have a stronger carry aspect. I actually love playing Pikachu. I think it just could use a little bit of a buff. It's maybe even closer to C tier. The thing about Pikachu is when you compare it to a lot of the other attackers, for instance, when you compare it to Psyshock Espeon, Psyshock Espeon outranges it, it still stuns, it outsecures this Pokemon. It doesn't do everything better, but a lot of the other special attackers do just about everything better. Even though Pikachu, a very viable choice, and I think a great choice for newer players. We are missing no other attackers except for Chandelure. I think Shandy's still crushing it. I would love to hear from you in the comments. I have not really seen Shandy slow down at all with these nerfs. I feel like Chandelure is still playing great. Every match that I see it in, I think Shandy is still outputting insane amounts of damage, still shutting the enemies down. This is a very, very strong special attacker, long-range, mage-style Pokemon, and I think Chandelure is still doing very, very well inside the meta. Those are our attackers, and as you can see, I think our attackers are doing really great inside of Pokemon Unite. There aren't a ton of attackers that I think are absolute trolling or anything like that. Even Greninja is really just a shade off from some of the other Pokemon in my opinion, and a good Greninja could crush it. And even Pikachu is a great support attacker. Ooh, I forgot Sylveon. Sylveon, there you are, buddy. I think Sylveon's very solid. Nothing wrong with Sylvie. It doesn't light the world on fire or anything like that. Really solid, you know, pretty strong. Evolves early, can put pressure on your opponents. Both builds are good. Sylveon's just kind of like an all-around really solid Pokemon right now. I think Sylveon's doing great. Let's move on to talk about our speedsters. I'm actually really excited to talk about this category because there's been some shifts inside of the speedster category that I think are really cool. Talonflame still doing all right inside the game. I'd say it's kind of B tier, maybe a little bit higher if you're a high skill level Talonflame. The nice thing about Talon is it can get away from some really, really bad situations. But when you're a Pokemon that needs to get up close and personal with some of the meaner Pokemon in the game right now, and you have to kind of land in to do some damage, I don't know if it bursts enough at times to really deal with some of these meaner Pokemon. I'm going to leave it into our B tier. It's a good speedster, not one of the great speedsters. Speaking of not great speedsters, we have to talk about Gengar. We have to talk about Absol. So Gengar and Absol are both sort of sitting somewhere in the C or D tier. The fact of the matter is every other speedster is really outpacing both of these Pokemon. If I had to sort them somehow, maybe Gengar is a little better because of Slick Spoon. Both of these Pokemon are carry Pokemon. They both have outplay potential. You could see games where Pokemon like this deal 20 KOs and do some amazing stuff. But I swear, into Pokemon like Umbreon, Lapras, Slowbro. They're just so rough into these Pokemon. They just can't do enough damage to really do anything, and then Gengar has to sit there after it's attacked, and it's just hard to get away. I'm not really in love with either of these Pokemon in the meta right now. Maybe I could say Absol's closer to the D tier. However, I do think, again, as any strong carry Pokemon, if you're really good with these Pokemon, you could do well. Maybe they're closer to the C tier, but both Gengar and Absol, I think, are pretty underwhelming speedsters right now. Now let's talk about some pretty overwhelming speedsters. First off, we have Zeraora. Zeraora has been sitting in the Decidueye Memorial tier for a very long time. I think it's safe to say it is at least an A tier choice inside the game right now, possibly even higher. The thing about Zeraora is, once its leveling got changed, it changed everything about this Pokemon, essentially. Not only that, it also did get a buff to its Discharge moveset. It got a cooldown buff. Wild Charge got a little bit of a nerf, but in general, Zeraora is rocketing up the tier list here. It could be even higher. I hesitate to put it a little higher, but now that it is a 5, 7, 9 Pokemon instead of a 6, 8, 9, 12, 14, like now that its leveling has changed, Zeraora is so much more viable. I'm so happy to see where Zera is in the game right now. I absolutely love what's going on with it. I don't think it's as powerful as some of our other speedsters I'm about to talk about, but it's right in there. It is right in there with these other three. Our other three speedsters being Dodrio, Zoroark, and Leafeon. So I'm gonna put one of these, maybe two of them up into our S tier. Here's the thing. I think all of these are extremely solid speedsters, hard carry Pokemon. I don't think the nerfs have really hurt Zoroark too much or Leafeon too much. Both of them are still incredibly good. In competitive play, honestly, all three are insanely viable, and in solo play, all three are insanely viable. Leafeon has a Unite move every 1 second, basically, and it evolves at level 4 to get a powerful move. Zoroark's combo of Feint or Night Slash is unbelievably brutal and can just delete Pokemon. Dodrio is amazingly mobile. Whether you're playing Tri-Attack or you're playing Drill Peck, you just have an incredible amount of presence in the match and in battles. I love all three of these Pokemon. If I had to put one higher than the others, it would probably still be Zoroark. I think Leafeon is really good. I think Dodrio is still also really good. I just think Zoroark feels like mechanically the hardest. And also, once you master the mechanics of this Pokemon, I think it feels like the most powerful out of the three. And I'm a Dodrio absolute fanatic. Did I say fanatic? Sure I did. I'm a Dodrio fanatic. I love this Pokemon like all other fanatics do. I think it's so good. And I love playing it. I like playing it way more than Zoroark, but I still do think Zoroark just feels like a cut above the other two, while all of these top tier speedsters feel very powerful. All right, let's move on to talk about our supporters inside of Pokemon Unite right here. Our supporters are an interesting category of Pokemon because a lot of them are sort of support in the way that you would expect from like a healing perspective, and then others are sort of a weird hybrid tank sort of supporter situation. The supporters are a cool category of Pokemon, and all of them are extremely good inside of Pokemon Unite. I'm going to start with a Pokemon that I haven't talked about much in a while, and I just have to recognize that this thing is still unbelievably broken, and that is Comfey. Comfey is insane. When you've seen, you know, the rise of Mewtwo, you've seen a lot of Comfeys hanging out with Mewtwo. The fact of the matter is, even though this Pokemon has been nerfed, it is still incredibly powerful and one of the most difficult things to deal with inside of Pokemon Unite. I think Comfey is brutal and amazing, and I'm sad to say it, but I do think it is still an S tier choice. I've been hoping that it's sort of fallen out from being an S tier choice. I honestly don't love seeing so many people picking it back up just because Mewtwo is around and they want to put a collar around it, but it is what it is. Comfey takes something broken and makes it more broken, and that is just a very difficult thing to deal with inside of most matches of Pokemon Unite. I think for that reason, it's one of our best supporters. That being said, a lot of the supporters are extremely good. I also believe that a supporter like Eldegoss is a top tier choice. The fact of the matter is, supporters inside of Pokemon Unite, I'd like to put Hoopa up here as well, are so incredibly good. The thing about them is they're not super experience hungry, and even though they're not experience hungry, they're still extremely impactful inside of a match. So if you end a match with an Eldegoss at level 11 or 12, that's fine. But if you end a match and you're a Greninja at level 11, that's horrible. And I think because of that, the fact that you get Pokemon like this and you get defenders that really round out your rosters and are able to let your carry Pokemon shine while at the same time being incredibly useful, it's just so amazing. And Unite has actually done a great job of making defenders and supporters valuable. Eldegoss and Hoopa, ranged support, early with experience share in both top and bottom path. They're so incredibly brutal, so difficult to deal with, just such great Pokemon. I feel like Eldegoss is a little easier, Hoopa a little more mechanically intense, but both of them give a huge bit of value to the team, and that's why I'm putting them up in our S tier. I think games without supporters, you can feel it, and they are a lot rougher. Blissey, a very, very good supporter. I'm going to put it up into our A+ tier. I think Blissey, after the nerfs, really doesn't fully feel like S to me anymore. But Blissey and Clefable both, I think, are just incredible supports. You really can't go wrong having any one of these 5 Pokemon on your team. Comfey, amazing. Eldegoss, Hoopa, great. Blissey, Clefable, a little more healing focused, still incredible. I really think that if you are playing this game solo, duo, trio, it's a necessity to have one of these Pokemon on the team. It would just be so amazing. And I know playing a solo queue support can be a little stressful. I've been there. I was a solo queue Comfey earlier. You see some heartbreaking things, but the difference it makes in a game is pretty incredible. After these more, I guess, stereotypical supports, you could look at them as, you have a few weird ones. We have Mime, we have Sableye, and we have Wigglytuff. Okay, Mr. Mime and Wigglytuff both feel fine to me. Mime might be a little better. I might say Wiggly is a little lower. The thing about Wiggly is it's countered extremely hard by Umbreon. Umbreon's in a lot of games, so I feel like Wiggly is just kind of hurting inside the game because of that. Mr. Mime is a tank, but it also deals a lot of damage, but it's not anything like it was when it was busted. It still feels good, but not great, I guess. I don't know. It's just such a weird place for a Pokemon to be. It's a decent tank, but all the tanks in the game are insane right now. But it is good. But it's B. I don't know. I don't know where else to put it. It's B, or maybe it's extremely low A, but it feels like it's B. And then you have Sableye. Sableye is one of the weirdest Pokemon in the game. It is sort of this weird harasser sort of Pokemon. It's extremely good. Even after the nerfs, it's extremely good, but it's extremely specific. I don't think running Sableye every game you're going to feel as impactful, especially in solo queue, as you probably used to. And for that reason, I'm going to keep Sableye here in our B tier. Every Pokemon in our B tier right here, these are Pokemon, especially if you're good with, you can absolutely dominate with them. Greninja, Talon, Mime, Sableye, these are all big forces to deal with inside of a match of Pokemon Unite. It's just unfortunate because I think with the nerfs to Sableye and with Sableye's overall impact in the match sometimes, it just feels like at times Sableye is a little more of a liability than a lot of the other Pokemon on our roster right here. So there you go. Those are our supporters, a class of Pokemon that is, really crushing it inside the game. All right, let's talk defenders. There are a lot of great defenders inside of Pokemon Unite. I think it might be easiest to start at the top. So let's do that with Umbreon and maybe even Lapras and maybe even Slowbro, something like this. It's possible Lapras is a rung down. The fact of the matter is, these 3 defenders are insane inside the game. They're all incredible. They're so tanky. They are able to keep themselves alive. Their Unite moves are all uniquely great. I mean, Slowbro has maybe the best Unite in the game, except for Umbreon maybe has the best Unite in the game. Lapras, I think, is a little shade behind the 2 of these Pokemon, but all 3 of these are crushing it. Even after the Umbreon nerfs, it is absolutely crushing it. This Pokemon is still amazing. You might be playing Wish more now, but I think all 3 of these are top tier defender Pokemon. I think they are better than every other defender inside the game. And that's tough to say because the defenders are so good. Let's talk about them. I think Trevenant is still a top tier choice. A+, A or A+ is very, very fair for this Pokemon. Snorlax, a very stereotypical defender, but very strong. I think A is a fair place to put this Pokemon. The ability to dive into your opponents and sort of disrupt the battlefield that way, I think is very powerful. Blastoise is a weird one. I would say it's probably A, but it's maybe one of the ones that's sort of at times closer to B. It's weird, but it can carry really hard, and its Unite move does a lot of damage. It kind of gets stuck because it's a 3-stage Evo, and that's one of the harder places to be. You know, it has to get a lot of experience to evolve. But besides that, I think Blastoise is doing pretty dang well. Goodra as well. I think Goodra probably has risen from the Midra tier. I think it's above the B tier at this point. More buffs to it recently. Its slow is better. Dragon Pulse has been buffed multiple times. I think Goodra is sort of finally out of the middle of the pack and sort of heading up here towards the topper echelon? Okay, the topper echelon. Nobody says upper echelon, they all say topper echelon. Mamoswine as well, I think is moving up closer to our A tier right here. The buffs it got, I don't think is putting it into a realm with something, you know, like Umbreon, but I do think it's really, really solid right now. Its Unite move is better. Its Ice Fang is better. Its passive is better. It just got a lot of nice quality of life adjustments. In general, defenders are overtuned inside the game. They are so incredibly strong. Having one on your team is a big difference maker. Even Crustle, that I put in the Decidueye Memorial tier, is a solid helper on your team. I just have to put this Pokemon here because compared to every other defender, it has clearly been left behind. I love Crustle. I think there are some great plays you can make with this Pokemon, but I have to put it down into the Decidueye Memorial tier until it gets a little love because almost every other defender has gotten really, really nice buffs or just come out and been extremely powerful, except for Crustle. And then we have Greedent, and I think Greedent, I'm going to put right here with Sableye. Extremely specific, pretty good at what it does, but gosh, it's so specific. And I think one thing that I've noticed with Sableye and Greedent is this weird sort of chaos agent has been losing some value when you're dealing with Pokemon that KO things so easily. I feel like both Sableye and Greedent performed a little bit better when the meta was much more... It was much more difficult to KO these Pokemon. The burst didn't feel as crazy, and I think they did better with that. Now that the burst feels a little bit higher, I actually am not in love with their position inside the game, even though they're two incredibly fun Pokemon to play. Now, onto our all-rounders, and of course, Mewtwo X being an all-rounder. Lots of good things going on in the all-rounder camp. Let's just start putting them up here. I think Garchomp's doing really well. I think Charizard maybe is a little lower than Garchomp right now. I'm going to put it B, even though I think it's actually pretty solid, just not really picked that much. Dragonite's not doing too bad inside the game. Dragonite is in a pretty solid place, both Hyper Beam and Outrage. It did get a nerf to Hyper Beam, but it was very, very minor. I think Dragonite's still doing well, especially after the buffs. Machamp is always a solid choice. I feel like not a lot of people pick up Machamp, but I think it's always a solid Pokemon. And I'm going to put Lucario up in our A tier here as well. Some people might think Lucario is a little higher. I'm still waiting to see that. I think from playing Lucario, I thought it was solid. I think the buffs are good, and I think people really good with this Pokemon are going to be very impressive, but it's not blowing me away. Like I don't think Lucario is broken or anything like that. I think the buffs are nice, and I think it's brought it up into a level that's comparable to a lot of the other all-rounders inside the game, outside of some of the ones that are broken or some of the ones that are just bad. Speaking of ones that are just bad, Zarina's weird, man. I don't know what's going on with Zarina. This Pokemon was nerfed, and it deserves some nerfs, and then it got some more nerfs, and maybe it even deserved those, but the fact of the matter is, it is so outclassed, it feels like, inside the game right now. It's just so squishy and Man, it's rough. Zarina's in a really rough spot. It's just so rough. Sword. I think Sword's either A or B, maybe closer to A, so I'll throw it up here inside of our A tier. I think Aegislash is doing pretty good. I like some of the buffs it received. I like playing this Pokemon. I feel like not a lot of people are picking it up, but every time I play it, it feels incredibly solid. It feels like it brawls pretty well, even into things like Mewtwo. It doesn't do a very bad job brawling into a Pokemon like that. Or Shifu, I feel like I can brawl against it. In some ways, I feel like it's a strong counter to some of the more overpowered all-rounders inside the game. Azumarill is either A or B. The thing about Azu is it got some nice buffs recently, but I just feel like every time you introduce a really powerful all-rounder, Azu feels like it wants to brawl it, and you don't really want to brawl Mewtwo, I don't think. And that's another reason that I constantly find Scizor in this position for me. I feel like there's so many things that Scizor does well into, and there are other times where I don't think it really wants to brawl that hard. Its win rate has never peaked over 50%. Maybe this week it will finally do it. I would love to see it happen, but I just don't see a lot going on for Scizor. It feels like it just doesn't fight that well into the meta that is littered with special attackers or Pokemon that do enough burst damage so that it can't sustain these long fights that it wants to. And then it doesn't really want to get into a long sustained fight with Mewtwo because then it can Mega, and that's just, yeah, that's a bad situation. Buzzwole. I think I might even put Buzzwole a cut above the rest, honestly. The more I see Buzz, it's an all-rounder that does a lot of damage, but also displaces enemies, and it's extremely high skill. I think this is one of the better all-rounders in the game, but I do think its skill level is probably what's holding it back for most players. You have to be really good with this Pokemon, but if you are, the things you can do with it, it really does kind of put some Pokemon in the game to shame. I think Buzzwole is incredibly good, but incredibly difficult to play. You've really got to figure out what you're doing with this Pokemon. Speaking of a Pokemon that's incredibly good, but maybe not as good as it used to be, this might be my most controversial placement of my entire tier list, but I'm going to put Zacian into our A tier. I don't even know if it's A+. I don't know. Maybe it's A+. I feel like Zacian has fallen off quite hard. I don't think it's great into Mewtwo. I'm not that impressed by it. I've been playing it a little bit now that Mewtwo is out. I'm like, well, let's actually sit down with Zacian a little bit here. And I think the nerfs have hurt this Pokemon considerably. I actually think reasonably, by the way, I think reasonably you actually have to be kind of good with this Pokemon to actually do something now. This is exactly how Zacian probably should have released. It might even be closer to the A+ tier if you're really competent with it, but the Intrepid Sword nerfs, the nerfs to the amount of stun on Sacred Sword, the agility nerfs, like overall, all of the nerfs this Pokemon has received, I feel like it's brought it back down to a somewhat reasonable level. I'm not really scared when I see one on the enemy team, and playing it myself personally, I don't think it's that overpowered. Like, yes, it's strong. Yes, maybe you could put it here. Maybe you could put it in the A+ tier, but it's not that powerful, it feels like, especially when we compare it to some of the things we're going to compare it to. Tyranitar. Yikes. Tyranitar is yikes right now. It has some specific some specific matchups that I think are pretty good. In general, if you have Tyranitar that needs to get to level 9 to be good, but we have Urshifu at level 5, Mewtwo at level 5, Zacian at level 5, like, what are we talking about here? Buzzwole at level 5, like, all of these Pokemon are good at 5, and Tyranitar is not good until 9? Are you kidding me? What is this Pokemon doing? It's not strong enough. It is not strong enough to have to wait till level 9. It is not. I'm sorry. Speaking of Urshifu, I think Water Bear is probably S tier, and I think Dark Bear is probably A+. You could go back and forth with these. I think Water Bear still is so incredibly good, and I've actually seen it do pretty well into Mewtwo, even though it likes prolonged fights. It also feels like it has a level of mobility that sets it apart from some of the other Pokemon that are trying to brawl Mewtwo, and its level 5 is just incredibly brutal. So I think Urshifu is still doing extremely well inside the meta. Scyther is meh. I feel like Scyther's C. Maybe it's B or C. It's kind of somewhere in here with these other speedsters, honestly. It's not a super impressive Pokemon. it doesn't KO things fast enough to be able to really deal with some of the crazier things inside the game. And I think, you know, we've been talking about it a lot. There's no question where Mewtwo is going. Mewtwo is incredibly powerful. Mewtwo is, it feels like not Zacian release powerful. And I would love to hear from you in the comments what you think. I don't think Zacian release level powerful, but I do think sort of that mid-range Zacian that we had that was still clearly an S tier Pokemon before it got more series of nerfs. I think this is very strong, and unfortunately, it is very easy to play. The tough thing about that is if a player picks up, let's say, Zarina, you could be very good with Zarina. You could carry with Zarina, but it takes a lot of skill, especially right now. Same thing with Zoroark. Zoroark takes a lot of skill. It's good, really good, but it's not the easiest thing to carry with. It's not just press buttons. Mewtwo at times feels press buttony. Its Unite move sets up some situations that are honestly obscene with some of the things that it can do, some of the ways it can steal things. It's just kind of absurd. And at times inside fights, it feels like as long as that person hits one of its moves and kind of gets a few attacks in, goes Mega, you're in trouble no matter what the skill level of that player is. For that reason, it is not only God tier due to its power level, it's also God tier due to its ease of use. I think Mewtwo could still use some nerfs. However, I do think the nerfs that they gave it were quite considerable. If we were talking about a tier list before those emergency nerfs, none of these Pokemon would be in the same reality as Mewtwo. So I think it's good that we saw those nerfs. We're going to need to see more nerfs for this Pokemon. The nice thing about the nerfs, I think the nicest thing about Mewtwo's nerfs, as I talk about the most powerful Pokemon in the game currently, the nicest thing about Mewtwo's nerfs are that Mewtwo is now punishable. You can KO this Pokemon. Even in Mega form, it's a little harder, but you can actually KO this Pokemon, especially when it hasn't Mega'd yet. And I think the counterplay to that is actually pretty good. If I were to continue to nerf Mewtwo, what I would actually like to see is that counterplay sort of highlighted even more. So maybe you spend less time in Mega, or it's even a little harder to get to Mega, but Mega can kind of stay as powerful as it is, and then when it's not Mega, make it a little bit weaker, and just sort of really start to highlight how you want to play against this Pokemon. I've had matches with great Mewtwo's, matches with terrible Mewtwo's. I've had some Mewtwo's on my team that have done 20,000 damage. So even though this Pokemon is incredibly busted right now, it doesn't mean it's going to ruin every single game. However, it is currently the most busted thing inside of Pokemon Unite.
And now this. Boop.
And that's why even though it's not out yet, Blaziken is clearly the best Pokemon in Unite. Once it releases, you won't want to play anything else. It'll send Mewtwo down into our nether realm. That's how bad this is going to be for Mewtwo. Sure, Mewtwo is okay right now, but Blaziken is where it's at. It's our God tier Pokemon of the week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I love you all, and I'll see you all next time. Buff Zacian!